Talking a little bit of politics, we are about a month away now from Michigan's primary. We're watching everything that's happening around the rest of the country. All right, I'm going to start with you, Stephen. What are you thinking?
Well, I mean, I think you can't talk about the primary anymore without talking about Mike Bloomberg and what role he might play beginning in states like Michigan. He's not going to show up until later in the cycle. He's sitting out Iowa and New Hampshire. He'll sit out South Carolina and Nevada and then jump into the race. And by the time they get here, it could be close. I mean, his support seems to be moving upward, even though he's not technically in the race yet. He's not debating. He's not on the ballot in the states that are holding primaries. But it's fascinating to watch. I mean, it's fascinating and horrifying all at the same time, right? This guy buying his way onto the ballot is somewhat problematic. But if you look at the rest of the field and the things that are going wrong for them, it's hard to say that they don't need a candidate who's got a little more together and is a little more organized and has the money to take on the president.
And that's what you're really talking about, the role that he's going to play, is the role that the money and that kind of financing and pushing the message out. No.
We've never seen this much money spent. And, you know, he had a little preview of it in 2018 when he bought the Virginia legislature. I mean, we have never seen transactional politics at this level. I mean, he bought that legislature. They proceeded to enact his agenda. And now he's spending the same kind of money, much, much more. I think he's spending about $100 million a month almost on his own campaign.
I can't even wrap my head around how you spend that.
It is, and it's his money he's spending. It's why you haven't seen him on the debate stage, because he doesn't have the broad base of donor support that the Democrats require. They're going to have to back off that soon, because if you look at his progress up the polls, I mean, he's getting into that 13-15% range without having appeared on a debate stage. I think he's the force to be reckoned with, strictly because of that money. And you know, in my mind, he would be a pretty decent choice for Republicans who are disillusioned with Trump if he just keep his hands off our guns and big gulps. You know, this nanny tendency of his is unappealing to a lot of conservatives.
Yeah, but I would think that this is pretty disillusioning, though, to people saying, if I don't have this kind of money, there's no way ever that the candidates can make it this far.
It's the system we've allowed to develop. I mean, if you look at the way that we have backed off campaign finance laws that we used to have, the way that Citizens United changed the playing field, conservatives cheered that when it happened. Now they're upset because the person who's probably going to take the most advantage of it is a Democrat, or at least a Democrat now. I mean, the idea of Mike Bloomberg being a Democrat is debatable, too.
He
used to be a Republican. Well, I mean, maybe he's neither.
Maybe that's what people want.
But what's really interesting about him is, Nolan says, look, he's got to keep his hands off our guns and our big gulps. I think if you sit on the other side of the political spectrum, you're most fearful of stop and frisk. I mean, the really aggressive policing that he not only debuted in New York, but doubled down on over and over again, even when it was clear that it had a disproportionate effect on African Americans and made the city intolerable for a lot of people. I mean, he's got criticism that will come at him from both sides very strong.
And that's interesting that you bring that up, because there's been so much conversation about Democratic candidates not having a connection with the African American community. You see all the front runners right now who seem to be arguing on stage, oh no, I have African American support, I have black support, and it seems a little tone deaf coming from a lot of white men standing on a stage and saying, no, I'm really the one that's going to have the support. Do you see that as a huge problem for Democrats right now?
Well, I think Joe Biden will. I mean, traditionally, he has done very well with African Americans, and they will play a very large role in deciding the ultimate candidate. He does well with older voters and older Democratic voters and black Democratic voters, and those are key constituencies. I wouldn't count. I mean, Joe Biden's been slipping. I think once this primary season goes to the South, Joe Biden's in pretty good shape.
He will do better. Presumably, he will do better.
I think he will if he can hang on.
The problem is you have to not get wiped out in those early contests, because that does tend to affect turnout in those later states.
So let me ask you about this then. So with all the fits and starts of the early primary states, do you think that we're going to see a change or a move up of where Michigan lies in the entire primary rollout of states?
Going forward?
Yeah, going forward after
I think,
this year.
there's a better case to be made now than ever that the way we're doing it doesn't make a lot of sense and it doesn't work. The question is, what else do you do? I mean, that's always been the sticking point, and everybody wants to go first. I have always thought, and I can remember writing back in what was it, 08 or 9 when this came up before, that the smartest way to do it seems to me to divide the country into regions and pick a state from each region to go first together each time. You could rotate the states, you could rotate the regions. There are lots of ways to make sure that it's not one state. The idea that one state should go first, I think, is kind of silly anyway.
You have, for a year or more, up to 2 years, these candidates camping out in Iowa and New Hampshire. Yeah. It makes no sense. If you had cluster primaries, it doesn't have to be regional. You can draw a state from each region.
From each region, right.
Look for diverse states. Force these candidates early on to campaign nationwide and not just say, gosh, if I can win in New Hampshire, I can win in Iowa, then I've got momentum. That hasn't necessarily proved true either. I mean, you think about the candidates who have won Iowa, not all of them have gone on to win the nominations.
I mean, it proved important for Barack Obama, right? I mean, that candidacy dies if it doesn't do well. In those early primaries, but it didn't help Huckabee at all. It killed Rick Santorum in what was that, 12, I think. It's all over the map, and it's an odd state. I mean, not odd in the sense of being strange, but odd in the sense of being not like other places. I mean, it is a very distinct population that doesn't sort of reflect so much else of the country.
All right. So let's look at Michigan in this next month. What are we planning, besides seeing a lot of Mike Bloomberg ads? What are we going to be seeing now from candidates in the next couple of weeks?
Well, I don't think they're going to get here for a couple of weeks. I think they're going to have their hands full with the Super Tuesday states. I think you'll see a huge surge of candidates into Michigan in the week, 10 days before the primary, but I don't expect to see a whole lot of them here.
Typically, we don't play that big of a role in the primary. I mean, it matters in the sense that there's delegates up for grabs, but it's not like these other states. And because we're behind Super Tuesday, often you have somebody who's already got so much momentum that it doesn't matter, and we tend to pick somebody who's not going to win anyway.
We are so eccentric in our primary choices.
Bernie Sanders, John McCain.
On both sides of this.
On both sides of the political spectrum. But I think that argues so strongly for Bloomberg here. I mean, I think it would be really interesting if he didn't win in Michigan, both given that history and given the amount of money he's already focused on this state.
And what will Republicans do here? I mean, will they cross over? Because I mean, they don't have a real primary. So will they cross over? And if they do, who will they vote for?
It's an interesting question too, right?
All right, a budget debate going on in Lansing. Everyone's got to have a budget. So tell us about ours and what the governor has put out. Stephen, what do you think, and what's notable standing out right now?
So when I saw the budget, one of the first thoughts I had was that this was the budget that we were supposed to see from Rick Snyder in that late second term, right? When he won in 2010, he talked about how there was time to tighten the belt and do some things to get the economy going again, grow jobs, and then there would be an investment agenda, and that some of the cuts that he'd made to things like education and higher ed and other things like that would go back. He never did that, and I think it's a real shame that he didn't. He had reasons why. I think in the end he set the state back by not doing it. Whitmer is saying, I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and reinvest in these things that actually open up opportunity and close the inequality gap that is really becoming a real problem in Michigan.
So if this is the reinvestment agenda, is she reinvesting in the right places?
Well, I'm not sure I would agree with that characterization, and particularly on roads. I mean, this borrowing on roads, we've talked about that's probably the only thing she could have done to get an immediate infusion of money into roads, except, she has completely dismissed the Republican idea that we can find money elsewhere in this budget to put in the roads. Maybe not all of it, but we can find some money, and we maybe should start using that sales tax money for roads. she's completely ignored that, which seems to me she's going to have problems getting this through the Republican legislature again. And I fear we're going to go right down to the wire again, and there's going to be another round of vetoes, and we're not going to have a functional governing process when it comes to the budget.
Minute
The
left.
spending on education,
Yeah.
for instance. I mean, that's something we have needed to do for a long time. Snyder never put that money in the budget to begin with.
Snyder raised education spending by a lot, perhaps not enough.
Actually, he didn't.
But
didn't.
overall education spending
He
went
did
up
it
during
into he did it by
during the
putting money into
Snyder,
their pensions, but the per pupil
which saved
allocation.
money for the school districts.
But the per pupil allocation was so low by the time he left office, and we are behind on that.
His last 4 years, he raised every year
tried,
the per
yeah.
pupil
enough.
allocation, and taking care of that pension allocation. If she moves
It's not a small
away
thing.
from that, I mean, that puts
no
school
question.
districts in a lot of trouble. But you have to also bring with it some spending accountability. Are we just going to spend more money to get the same results? Because our results are pretty dismal. And so what are we going to do in terms of making
Chicken
sure
and
we're
egg. Are
spending
they bad
money
because
better?
of the money, or is the money going to make them better?
All right, well, we're going to have to leave it there and keep watching and waiting. All right, thanks so much, guys.